I was home alone, my parents having stepped out, ironically, to pick up milk and a few other essentials. The atmosphere in the house was unusually quiet, a stillness that usually comforted me. But that day it felt charged, almost eerie. Out of nowhere, I heard laughter echoing from deep within my closet. At first, I assumed it was my little sister Madison trying to pull one of her classic pranks. Madison, I have told you a million times, your tricks do not scare me anymore, I called out, half expecting her to burst out laughing. Instead, my phone buzzed with a message from my parents that sent a chill down my spine. Madison is with us helping to grab the groceries. We will be home soon. My heart raced, and I felt a cold sweat beat on my forehead. The laughter came again, this time layered with a menacing tone. Come on, Blake. I want to play with you in the closet. Panic surged through me. I sprang from my bed, adrenaline coursing through my veins, and sprinted toward the front door. My heart hammered in my chest, and I felt as though I might throw up. I reached my neighbor's house, my mind racing as I pounded on their door. They opened it, worry etched on their faces. What's wrong? They asked, concern spilling from their voices. I recounted the bizarre events, each word tumbling over the other as they called the police for me. The officers arrived quickly, their flashlights sweeping through the dark corners of my house as I waited anxiously. It felt like an eternity before they emerged from the back, their expressions grim. You're going to want to hear this, kid, one of the officers said, his tone serious. There's been a report of a suspicious person in the neighborhood, a man who has been acting strangely. We'll need to investigate. A chill settled in my stomach. I thought of the laughter, of the voice calling my name. It was as if my instincts had warned me about something far more sinister lurking nearby. As they canvassed the area, I could not shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me. I had always felt safe in my home, but that day was different. Since that terrifying experience, I have kept my nightlight on, refusing to be alone. But one question lingers in the back of my mind. What would have happened if I had chosen to confront whatever was in that closet? The next few days felt like I was living in a fog. I stayed at my neighbor's house as much as possible, not wanting to be alone in my own home. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside made my heart race. The laughter from the closet haunted my dreams, twisting into nightmares that left me waking in a cold sweat. My parents returned home, blissfully unaware of the chilling events that had unfolded in their absence. I tried to act normal, to reassure them that everything was fine, but the truth gnawed at me like a persistent itch. I avoided going anywhere near my closet, keeping the door shut tight. One afternoon, while my parents were busy in the kitchen, I overheard them talking about the recent break-ins in our neighborhood. My mom mentioned how strange it was that the local police hadn't caught the suspect yet. She shook her head in disbelief. It's just not safe anymore, she said. That night I lay in bed, staring at the faint glow of my nightlight. Shadows danced on the walls and I could hear the wind howling outside. I rolled over, trying to push the thoughts of the closet from my mind, but the image of that sinister laughter refused to leave me. As the hours ticked by, I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was faint but unmistakable, a soft, scratching sound coming from inside the closet. My heart raced. Was it my imagination playing tricks on me? Or was there really something inside? Summoning every ounce of courage, I crept out of bed and tiptoed toward the closet. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. The scratching grew louder, almost frantic. I hesitated, remembering the laughter, the sinister invitation. I took a deep breath and yanked the door open, but all I found was darkness. The closet was empty, clothes hanging lifelessly on their hangers, but the sense of dread loomed heavy in the air. That was when I heard it, footsteps coming from the hallway. My heart dropped into my stomach as I froze, straining to listen. Someone was in the house. I hurried back to my room, heart racing as I quickly closed the door behind me and leaned against it, my breath coming in quick gasps. The footsteps approached, slow and deliberate, as if someone was taking their time, relishing the fear that hung in the air. Then I heard a low, gravelly voice murmur, "Blake, come out to play." I shivered at the sound. It was the same voice from my nightmares, laced with malice. What had started as a childhood prank had morphed into something dark and twisted. As I pressed my back against the door, I could hear the figure creeping closer, a shadow creeping beneath the crack at the bottom. The voice grew louder, almost a taunt now. "You know I'm here, don't you?" Panic surged through me as I scanned the room for a way out. I couldn't face whatever this was. I was just a kid. How could I stand against an evil householder who seemed to know my name? With trembling hands, I grabbed my phone and texted my parents, pleading for them to come home. "Please hurry. Something is in the house. I am scared." But I knew they wouldn't be back for a while. The seconds stretched like hours, and I could hear the laughter echoing through the hallway again. "Blake, you can't hide from me forever." I was trapped in my own home, and I had to find a way to confront whatever evil was lurking just outside my door. My heart pounded in my chest, a relentless drumbeat echoing in my ears. I stood frozen against my bedroom door, listening to the dark voice taunting me from the hallway. The laughter grew louder, twisting my insides into knots. "I know you are in there, Blake. I can smell your fear." Desperation clawed at me. I needed a plan, but my mind raced with confusion. There had to be a way to escape this nightmare. The only option I could think of was to stay quiet and hope the figure would grow bored and leave. The scratching at the door stopped, and for a moment, a heavy silence enveloped the room. My breath hung in the air, thick with dread. Then came a soft knock, barely audible, but it sent a chill down my spine. "Blake," the voice crooned, dripping with malice, "don't you want to come out and play?" I could feel the urge to scream building in my throat, but I held it back. If I made a sound, I wasn't sure what would happen. Time stretched on, and the silence morphed into an unbearable weight. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the doorknob rattled. My heart dropped as I held my breath. The door creaked as it slowly opened, revealing a shadowy figure just outside. "Come on, Blake. Let's have some fun together," the figure said, his voice smooth yet chilling. The darkness concealed his features, but I could sense the malevolence radiating from him. In that moment, I decided I couldn't just wait for whatever evil was outside to find me. I had to act. I darted across my room, searching for a weapon or anything I could use to defend myself. My eyes landed on my baseball bat leaning against the wall. Grabbing it tightly, I felt a flicker of courage ignite within me. "Leave me alone," I shouted, my voice trembling, but louder than I thought possible. The figure paused, seemingly taken aback. "Why do you want to play by yourself?" "I just want to be your friend." He stepped into the room, the darkness swirling around him like a fog. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I stood my ground, bat raised. "Stay back," I warned, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Why are you so afraid?" He took a step closer, and I could make out his features in the faint light of the night. His eyes were dark pits, void of any warmth. His smile stretched across his face, almost impossibly wide, and his presence seemed to suck the air from the room. "Because you're not my friend," I yelled, my voice shaking as I swung the bat. But he was fast. He ducked and the bat missed him completely, smashing into my desk instead. The sound of wood splintering filled the room, and he let out a chilling laugh that echoed off the walls. "Why would you do that, Blake?" he taunted, his voice dripping with amusement. "I just wanted to play." His laughter morphed into something more sinister, echoing in my mind like a haunting melody. I could feel my resolve weakening as he stepped closer, a predator closing in on its prey. "Why don't you just give in?" he whispered, a low, hypnotic tone lacing his words. "It will be so much more fun if you do." With my heart racing and panic rising, I had to think fast. I needed to get out of that room. My eyes darted to the window, and without thinking, I lunged for it. Throwing the window open, I climbed out onto the ledge, my heart in my throat. I could hear him behind me, his voice echoing through the room. "You can't escape, Blake. You belong to me now." I could feel the cool night air rushing against my skin as I carefully inched along the ledge, my eyes focused on the ground below. But as I looked down, I realized that escape might be more dangerous than facing him. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I had to make a choice: leap into the unknown or face whatever terror awaited me inside my own home. I clung to the ledge, my heart pounding like a jackhammer, as I looked down at the ground below. The night was dark, and shadows danced across the grass like wraiths. I could hear the sinister laughter still echoing inside my room, taunting me, daring me to jump. "Why are you hesitating, Blake?" the voice called out from behind me, smooth and dripping with mockery. "You're already part of my world now. Just let go." The thought of plunging into the unknown sent chills down my spine, but the alternative was even worse. I could feel the darkness inside the room pulling at me, urging me to come back, to succumb to whatever evil was waiting. Taking a deep breath, I made my decision. I couldn't go back. I couldn't let him win. Summoning all my courage, I jumped. The ground rushed up to meet me, and for a brief moment, everything felt suspended in time. I hit the grass hard, the impact jarring my bones, but I pushed through the pain. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline coursing through me as I bolted toward my neighbor's house, desperation propelling me forward. "Help! Please!" I shouted as I ran, my voice strained and hoarse. I could hear him behind me, his laughter ringing out into the night. "Run, Blake! Run as fast as you can!" he jeered, the sound of his footsteps echoing in pursuit. I reached my neighbor's door, pounding on it with all my strength. "Please let me in!" I shouted, panic surging in my chest. The door swung open and my neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, looked down at me, her expression shifting from confusion to alarm as she took in my terrified face. "What's wrong, Blake?" she asked, worry creasing her brow. "Please, someone is after me," I gasped, pulling her inside as I rushed through the doorway. I glanced back toward my house, half expecting to see the figure lurking in the shadows. Mrs. Thompson quickly locked the door behind us, her hands trembling. "What do you mean? Who is after you?" I struggled to catch my breath as I explained, my words spilling out in a frantic rush. "There's someone in my house, a man who keeps calling my name. He was in my closet, and I think he wants to hurt me." Mrs. Thompson's face paled as she listened, and she grabbed her phone to call the police. "You should have told your parents," she exclaimed, her voice laced with concern. "This is serious." As she spoke, I felt the overwhelming weight of dread settle over me again. I could still hear the echo of that malicious voice in my mind, taunting me, feeding off my fear. Just then, the lights flickered, and I glanced toward the window. The night seemed to darken even further, as if the shadows were growing, creeping closer. I felt the air shift around us, thickening with a palpable tension. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the front of the house, making both of us jump. "What was that?" I whispered, my heart racing once more. "It could just be the wind," Mrs. Thompson said, though her voice wavered. "Stay close to me." But I knew better. It wasn't the wind. I could feel it. The dark presence that had been following me, watching me, creeping ever closer. "Please, Mrs. Thompson, we need to hide," I urged, my voice shaking. "I think he knows I'm here." With a nod, she led me into her living room, shutting the curtains tight and dimming the lights. We huddled together behind the couch, hearts racing in unison as the sound of footsteps grew louder outside. "Blake, what does he want?" Mrs. Thompson whispered, her eyes wide with fear. I swallowed hard, struggling to find the words. "I don't know, but I think he wants to take me. He kept saying I belong to him." Mrs. Thompson's grip on my arm tightened as the sound of scraping came from the door. The laughter echoed through the house, sending chills down my spine. "Blake, I'm coming for you," the voice called, smooth and honeyed, wrapping around me like a cold, damp blanket. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block it out. I needed to think, to find a way to escape this nightmare once and for all. But there was only one way out, and I wasn't sure I was ready to face it. The scraping sound at the door intensified, a cruel reminder of the presence lurking just outside. My heart raced, each thump echoing in my ears as Mrs. Thompson and I huddled together behind the couch, our breathing shallow and frantic. "Blake," Mrs. Thompson whispered, her voice trembling. "We have to stay quiet. If he's trying to get in, we don't want him to know we're here." I nodded, but the fear coiling in my stomach made it hard to stay still. The laughter continued, swirling around us like a dark cloud. "You think you can hide? I can smell your fear, Blake." "Why does he keep saying my name?" I murmured, my voice barely above a whisper. The laughter seemed to morph into a chilling melody that made my skin crawl. Suddenly, the door shook violently as something slammed against it from the outside. My breath caught in my throat, and I could feel Mrs. Thompson's hand tighten around mine. "I'm going to check the back door," she said softly, determination mingling with fear in her voice. "Stay here and do not make a sound." I watched her slip away, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to scream for her to stay, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I focused on the front door, my pulse racing as I tried to anticipate what would happen next. As the minutes ticked by, the banging continued, each strike rattling the house to its core. I could feel the walls closing in on me, and the laughter grew louder, almost mocking my fear. "You can't hide forever, Blake. I know you are in there." Then just as suddenly as it started, the noise stopped. An eerie silence enveloped the house, thick and suffocating. I strained to listen, my breath held in anticipation. The back door creaked open, and Mrs. Thompson stepped back into the living room, her face pale. "He's not out there," she whispered, a tremor in her voice. "But I think he's found another way in." My stomach dropped. "What do we do?" "We need to get out of this house," she said urgently. "We can't stay here any longer. Come on, we'll use the back window." I nodded, relief washing over me. As we tiptoed toward the back of the house, I could still hear the laughter echoing through the walls, and my skin prickled with dread. Mrs. Thompson opened the window wide, the cool night air spilling into the room. "Go first," she urged. "I'll follow right after." I climbed through the window and landed softly on the grass outside, glancing around to make sure the coast was clear. The night was still, but the oppressive darkness loomed over us like a predator waiting to strike. Mrs. Thompson followed quickly, her movements swift and quiet. As she landed beside me, I felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice shaky. "I don't know what I would have done without you." "Let's go to the neighbor's house across the street," she said, pointing. "We need to get somewhere safe." As we dashed across the yard, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, lurking in the shadows. The laughter started again, echoing in the distance. "You think you can escape? I will always find you." Mrs. Thompson glanced back, her eyes wide with fear. "Run!" she yelled, and we sprinted toward the safety of the other house. We reached the porch just as the front door swung open. Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly woman with kind eyes, stood there, confusion etched on her face. "What in the world is going on?" she asked, concern flooding her expression. "Please, let us in," Mrs. Thompson pleaded, breathless. Without hesitation, Mrs. Jenkins stepped aside, and we rushed inside. "Lock the door!" I shouted, urgency pouring from my voice. Mrs. Jenkins hurried to the door, securing the lock as we collapsed onto the living room floor. "What happened?" she asked, her brow furrowed in concern. "There's someone after us," I gasped, trying to catch my breath. "He's been following me since I was at home." "Who? What do you mean?" she pressed, her eyes wide with alarm. I glanced at Mrs. Thompson, who nodded. "There's a man in our neighborhood, someone dangerous. He was in Blake's house, and I think he might be trying to hurt him." Mrs. Jenkins gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "That's horrifying. We must call the police immediately." "No," I interrupted, panic rising. "They already know. He's clever, and if he knows we called them—" Suddenly, a loud thud reverberated through the house, and I jumped, heart racing once more. "He's found us!" The laughter echoed again, but this time it felt closer, more menacing. "You think you can run? I will always be there, watching, waiting." Mrs. Jenkins grabbed her phone and dialed, but I could barely hear her over the cacophony of fear that filled the room. "We need to hide," I whispered urgently. "Where?" Mrs. Thompson asked, looking around frantically. "Downstairs," I suggested, my mind racing. "There might be a basement we can hide in." We hurried toward the door leading to the basement, the thuds growing louder, reverberating through the walls. I could feel the walls tremble as we descended the stairs, the darkness swallowing us whole. Once we reached the bottom, I could barely see. My heart raced and I fumbled for the light switch. The dim bulb flickered to life, casting long shadows across the room. "Now what?" Mrs. Thompson asked, her voice barely a whisper. "We wait," I replied, hoping it would be enough. We crouched in the corner, hearts pounding, as the laughter grew louder above us. "I know you are down there." The figure's voice reverberated through the floorboards, chilling me to the bone. "You cannot hide from me, Blake. You belong to me." I pressed my back against the wall, trying to stay silent. I could feel Mrs. Thompson's hand shaking in mine, and I could hardly breathe, each inhale a reminder of the terror that surrounded us. We needed to think of a way out, but as the laughter filled the air, I began to doubt whether we would ever escape this nightmare. The laughter above us echoed like a sinister melody, wrapping around us and sinking into my bones. I pressed myself further into the corner, desperate to make myself as small as possible. My breath quickened, each inhale trembling with fear as I felt the weight of darkness enveloping us. "Blake, what are we going to do?" Mrs. Thompson whispered, her voice strained with anxiety. "We can't stay down here forever." "I don't know," I admitted, my mind racing. "We have to wait until he leaves or finds another way in." The laughter grew louder, taunting us. "You think hiding will save you? You are mine, Blake. I will always find you." Every word sent a chill down my spine. The realization hit me hard. He wasn't just hunting me. He was toying with us. I could feel my stomach twist with dread. "Do you think he knows we are here?" Mrs. Jenkins asked, her voice quivering. "I don't know," I replied, glancing around the dim basement for any possible escape route. The shadows seemed to loom larger, growing heavier with every passing second. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from above, followed by a series of thuds that sent a jolt of panic through me. "He's coming down," I whispered urgently. "We need to move," Mrs. Thompson insisted, looking around frantically for a way out. I spotted a small window high above us, barely big enough for a person to squeeze through. "There! If we can get to that window, we might be able to escape." "But how?" Mrs. Jenkins asked, her voice shaky. "It's too high." "We can stack some things to reach it," I replied, determination rising within me. "There's got to be something down here." As we searched through the dimly lit basement, the sound of footsteps above us grew louder, punctuated by the maniacal laughter that echoed down the staircase. "I can hear you, Blake. You can't hide forever." My pulse raced as I grabbed a sturdy wooden crate and gestured for the others to help. "Hurry," I urged. We piled crates and old furniture beneath the window, the noise above us growing more chaotic. I could hear the creaking of floorboards as he approached, and my heart raced with each passing moment. "Almost there," I shouted as we stacked the last crate. I climbed onto the makeshift platform, my hands trembling as I reached for the window. The laughter above us became a low growl, echoing through the basement. "I'm coming for you!" With one last heave, I managed to grasp the window frame. "I'm going to try to get it open." The window was stuck, the wood warped from years of neglect. I grunted and pulled with all my might, panic surging through me as I felt the thud of footsteps draw nearer. "Blake!" Mrs. Thompson cried, her voice tinged with desperation. "We need to hurry!" I pushed harder against the window until finally it creaked open, the cool night air rushing in like a breath of freedom. "I did it! Help me through!" I climbed through the narrow opening, the cold air washing over me as I landed on the grass outside. I quickly turned back, reaching my hand through the window. "Come on!" Mrs. Thompson and Mrs. Jenkins scrambled to climb up, and I could see the terror on their faces as the footsteps grew louder behind us. "Hurry!" I shouted, adrenaline surging through me. Just as Mrs. Thompson made it through, a shadow loomed at the top of the stairs, the figure standing there like a dark silhouette. "You think you can escape me?" he bellowed, his voice echoing through the basement. I felt my heart drop as Mrs. Jenkins struggled. "I can't fit," she gasped, panic flashing in her eyes. "Pull her through," I yelled, reaching out as Mrs. Thompson and I both grasped Mrs. Jenkins' hands. With one mighty tug, we pulled her through the window, and we fell back onto the grass outside, panting and wide-eyed. But the danger wasn't over yet. The figure emerged from the basement, his dark form towering above us as he glared down with eyes that glinted like cold steel. "You will regret this, Blake!" We scrambled to our feet, adrenaline propelling us forward as we bolted across the yard. "Run!" Mrs. Thompson shouted, leading the way. We sprinted toward the neighboring house, the sound of heavy footsteps pounding behind us. "This way," I urged, pointing to the side of the house where I spotted an open door. We dashed inside, Mrs. Thompson closing the door behind us with a loud thud. We locked it quickly, hearts racing as we pressed our backs against the wall, listening for any sign of him. "What do we do now?" Mrs. Jenkins asked, her face pale with fear. "We can't stay here. We need to find a way to call for help," I replied, glancing around the unfamiliar house. "Maybe there's a phone or a way to contact the police," Mrs. Thompson suggested. "Let's look for a way out." As we crept through the dimly lit house, the laughter echoed in my mind, chilling me to the core. It felt like he was everywhere, lurking just beyond the walls, waiting for us to let our guard down. "Blake," he called, his voice a haunting whisper that seemed to come from every corner of the room. "I know you are in there." I shuddered, dread washing over me. "We need to hurry," I urged, moving quickly down the hallway. We spotted a door at the end, leading to the living room. With a swift push, we entered, scanning the area for any signs of safety. But my heart sank when I noticed the shadows shifting in the corners, the air thick with a malevolent presence. "This house feels wrong," Mrs. Jenkins murmured, her eyes darting nervously. I nodded, my instincts screaming at me. "We need to find a way to defend ourselves if he gets in." Just as I said that, the front door rattled violently. "You can't escape me," he yelled, his voice reverberating through the house. Panic surged through me. "We have to get ready." We quickly searched for anything we could use as a weapon. I grabbed a heavy lamp, the metal cold and reassuring in my hands. "If he comes in, we have to fight back." Mrs. Thompson nodded, determination replacing fear in her eyes. "We won't let him take us." The door burst open, and the figure stormed into the room, his dark eyes glinting with malice. "You think you can resist me? You are mine!" We stood our ground, weapons raised, hearts pounding, as we prepared to face the evil that had been hunting me for so long. The air thickened with tension as the figure advanced into the room, a twisted smile stretching across his face. "So brave, Blake. But bravery won't save you," he taunted, his voice a low growl that sent shivers down my spine. Mrs. Thompson raised the lamp, her hands shaking slightly but her resolve firm. "Get away from us!" she shouted, her voice echoing in the small room. The man laughed, a deep, sinister sound that reverberated off the walls. "You think you can scare me with that little toy? I've seen far worse in my time." I tightened my grip on the lamp, my heart racing as I tried to steady my breathing. "What do you want from us?" I demanded, hoping to stall him, to buy us some time. "I want what I can't have," he replied, his eyes narrowing. "Fear, chaos, control. You're just the perfect subjects." The air crackled with energy as he stepped closer, his presence suffocating. "You think you can run? You think you can hide? I know this neighborhood like the back of my hand." I felt my stomach churn as he continued to advance, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "You are nothing but prey, and I am the hunter." Mrs. Jenkins gasped, her face paling as the reality of our situation set in. "We need to get out of here," she urged, panic lacing her voice. "Not so fast," he snarled, lunging toward us. In that instant, I swung the lamp with all my might, the heavy metal crashing against his shoulder. He stumbled back, surprise flickering across his face for a brief moment before rage replaced it. "Is that all you have?" he spat, his voice low and dangerous. "You'll regret that." I could see the fury bubbling within him, and the feeling of dread grew stronger. "We need to get to the back door," I yelled, glancing at the exit. Mrs. Thompson and Mrs. Jenkins nodded, and we started backing away cautiously, trying to keep our eyes on him. "Run!" I shouted suddenly, darting toward the door. The man let out a furious roar and charged after us, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. We burst through the door, spilling into the backyard, the cool night air hitting us like a wave. The darkness felt alive, surrounding us as we sprinted across the lawn. "Where do we go?" Mrs. Thompson gasped, glancing back at the house. "Towards the street," I yelled, leading the way. "We have to reach help." As we ran, the sound of his laughter followed us, echoing through the night like a haunting reminder that he was right behind us. "You can't escape! I will find you!" Adrenaline surged through my veins as we reached the sidewalk. We sprinted toward the main road, hoping to find someone, anyone who could help us. But the night was eerily quiet, the only sound being our hurried breaths and the distant rumble of cars far away. "Why isn't anyone out?" Mrs. Jenkins gasped, her voice laced with fear. "I don't know," I replied, my heart pounding. We have to keep moving. We raced down the street, glancing over our shoulders to see if he was still following. The shadows danced ominously, and my pulse quickened with every step. "Where's the nearest house?" Mrs. Thompson shouted, desperation creeping into her voice. "There." I pointed to a house with lights on in the distance. "We need to get there." We picked up speed, pushing ourselves harder as the laughter began to fade. For a moment, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe we could make it. But just as we approached the house, the laughter returned, now louder and more sinister. "You think you can escape me? I'm always one step ahead." I turned to look back, dread flooding my senses. He stood at the edge of the lawn, his eyes gleaming in the darkness, watching us like a hawk. "Keep going," I shouted, urging the others forward. As we reached the front porch, I knocked frantically on the door, praying someone would answer. "Please, someone let us in." The door swung open, revealing a startled man. "What's going on?" he asked, confusion etched on his face. "Help! We're being chased!" Mrs. Thompson cried, her voice trembling. Without hesitation, the man stepped aside and we rushed inside. "Lock the door!" I yelled, and he quickly secured it. The heavy sound of the lock clicking into place felt like a momentary relief. "What happened?" he asked, looking between us, concern written on his face. "There's a man, an evil man. He's been after us," I stammered, struggling to catch my breath. "He's trying to get in." The man's expression darkened. "Where is he?" "Outside," I replied, glancing nervously toward the door. He was right behind us. We gathered in the living room, our hearts pounding as we waited for the inevitable confrontation. But the seconds stretched into minutes, and the oppressive silence filled the air. "What is he doing?" I wondered aloud, fear curling in my stomach. "Maybe he thinks he can intimidate us," the man said, his voice steady. "Or he's planning his next move. Either way, we can't let our guard down," Mrs. Thompson said, her eyes wide with fear. Just then, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed on the porch, and my heart dropped. "He's here!" I hissed. "Everyone stay quiet," the man ordered, his voice low and steady. The footsteps grew louder, the laughter intertwining with the sound of his movements. "You think you can hide? I can smell your fear." We all held our breath, hearts pounding in unison as we prepared for what would come next. Suddenly, there was a loud bang against the door, shaking the frame. "Let me in! I know you're there!" The man moved quickly, rushing to the window to peek outside. "He's right there!" "Stay back!" I shouted, clutching the lamp tightly in my hands. The man turned, eyes wide. "We have to prepare ourselves. If he breaks in, we fight." The door rattled again, the laughter morphing into a low, menacing growl. "You can't run from me!" We braced ourselves for the worst, ready to face the terror that had haunted me for so long. The door shook violently as the figure slammed against it again, his laughter echoing through the room like a nightmare come to life. "You cannot hide. I will get what I want." We exchanged frantic glances, our hearts pounding in our chests. The man standing beside us took a deep breath, his determination evident. "When he breaks through, we confront him together," he said firmly. I nodded, trying to suppress the wave of dread threatening to wash over me. "We can't let him in. We have to protect ourselves." The pounding intensified, the door rattling under the weight of his relentless force. "You think you can keep me out? I own this town. You are all mine." I gripped the lamp tighter, its cold metal reassuring in my hands. "Get ready," I shouted, adrenaline coursing through my veins. With one final, earth-shattering blow, the door burst open, splintering at the hinges. The figure stood in the doorway, cloaked in darkness, his eyes glinting like shards of glass. "Hello, my friends," he sneered, stepping forward into the dim light of the living room. "Get back," Mrs. Thompson yelled, raising the lamp like a weapon. He stopped, amusement dancing across his features. "You think you can scare me with that?" He chuckled, tilting his head. "You're wasting your energy." "We're not afraid of you," I shouted, stepping forward. "You won't take us." His laughter echoed again, a twisted sound that sent chills down my spine. "Ah, the brave little hero thinks he can stand up to me. How delightful." "Enough of this," the man beside me said, stepping forward defiantly. "We're not afraid of you. You need to leave us alone." The figure's expression shifted, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "You're in my way, and that will cost you dearly." With a sudden movement, he lunged at us, a blur of motion that sent us scrambling back. "No!" I yelled, swinging the lamp wildly. The metal connected with his shoulder, and he stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock. "You'll pay for that!" "Keep swinging!" the man shouted, and I swung again, adrenaline fueling my every movement. Mrs. Thompson and Mrs. Jenkins joined in, brandishing whatever objects they could find. The room became a whirlwind of chaos, our fear transforming into determination. We surrounded him, each of us striking out with everything we had. "You think this will stop me?" he roared, swatting away our attacks as if we were mere insects. But we pressed on, the terror that had plagued me for so long now igniting a fire within. "You won't take us!" I screamed, swinging the lamp with renewed vigor. Suddenly he laughed, a sound that filled the room with an icy dread. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." In that moment I realized he was more than just a man. He was a creature of the night, a specter that thrived on fear and despair. "Together!" I shouted, rallying my friends. "We can't let him win!" With a final push, we closed in, striking in unison. The figure reeled back, surprise flashing in his eyes as we cornered him against the wall. "You can't hold me forever," he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "I'll be back. You'll never escape me." Just as his words hung in the air, I felt a surge of energy within me, a light that pushed against the darkness. "Not if we stand together," I shouted, and in that moment I swung the lamp one last time, the metal connecting with a blinding force. The room erupted in a flash of light, illuminating the darkness and filling the space with a brilliant glow. The figure howled in rage, his body dissolving into shadow, retreating into the depths of the night. "No!" he screamed, his voice echoing as he vanished into the darkness. We stood in stunned silence, panting and wide-eyed, the remnants of fear lingering in the air. The room felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. "What just happened?" Mrs. Jenkins gasped, looking around in disbelief. "I don't know," I replied, still trying to catch my breath. "But I think we did it." The man who had helped us stepped forward, a relieved smile breaking across his face. "You showed incredible courage. You stood against the darkness, and you won." We shared a collective sigh of relief, the tension slowly dissipating as reality began to settle back in. "But he'll come back, won't he?" I asked, the fear creeping back into my mind. "He might," the man replied thoughtfully. "But now you know how to fight back. You've faced your fear, and that is a powerful weapon." As we gathered ourselves, I realized that the terror of the past could no longer control me. I had faced the nightmare and emerged stronger. From that day on, I refused to be a victim. I would never forget the laughter that haunted me, but I had learned that courage could drive away even the darkest shadows. As I stood with my friends in the warm light of the living room, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Whatever came next, we would face it together. And no matter what happened, I would never allow fear to rule my life again.